So without any more ado, could I hand over to Andrew Parfitt to introduce our speaker this evening?
Sure. Thank you, David, and good evening, everyone. I've been asked to introduce Sara, as we're old acquaintances through our time with CMS, the Church Mission Society, with an interest in the Persian-speaking world. So Dr. Sara Afshari is a researcher, lecturer, and PhD supervisor at Oxford Centre for Religion and Public Life, and a research associate at the University of Pretoria. She is a co-founder and former executive director of the Persian language Christian satellite TV channel Sat7 Pars. Her doctoral studies were in media, religion, and culture, and her current areas of research interest include how believers from a Muslim background negotiate their conversion to Christianity using media, and how conversion to Christianity is used and understood by Muslims. And far from being removed from her topic tonight, she is herself from Iran and is a convert to Christianity from a Shia/communist/atheist background, which interesting mix might perhaps come up in our discussion later on, but I don't wish to preempt you too much, so I'll pass over to you, Sara. It's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for for your introduction, and thank you, Nicholas and David, for inviting me to take part in your academy and giving me this opportunity to talk. I am going to share my screen. And while I'm sharing my screen, I'd like to say that I am so pleased to see at least 5 to 6 converts from Muslim background have joined us tonight from even Canada and in a different part of the world. And thank you so much for your interest and for coming. And we hope to hear some of their comments as well. My topic tonight is, my topic tonight, or the title is Religious Conversion or Cultural Integration. Conversion of Muslim background migrants, refugees into Christianity in Europe and North America. But I also will talk about the conversion in general sense. Therefore, the outline of my talk will be as follows. I will give you a little bit background on what the topic is, and which is, again, the religious conversion, how migrants in Europe is using religious conversion as a strategy for integration and as a strategy for migration. And my main focus of migrants and refugees, I used it in a general term, but my main focus, of course, are Iranians and also Afghans and Kurds, but not much about Arabs, although the situation in the Arab countries and in North Africa, they are different. Therefore, I'm just focusing on Iranians in both in Iran as well as in Europe in that sense. My talk is 3 sections. Section 1, in section 1, I give you a little bit understanding about religious conversion, mainly from Islam to Christianity, addressing the meaning of conversion, some of the motives and agenda of converts, and also will briefly address some of the differences between those Muslim background who convert in Iran and those Iranians convert in Europe. And in the second section, I will talk about understanding religious conversion as a social capital resource within the European societies and countries, and how migrants use religion of the host as capital resource. I will also give a brief overview of religious conversion as an integration and migration strategy and as a tool to construct and reshape their religious identity and meaning-making system. And in the third section, I will just give some suggestion about the possible implications for the church and then how that can enrich the church. Because I do believe religious conversion is an opportunity, and a huge opportunity for the church, not only for the converts, but also for the church. The section 1, let's just move to the section 1. The section 1, understanding of religious conversion or change of religion. It is very, myself coming from Islamic background, and it is very difficult, even there are differences between religious conversion and change of religion when it comes to Islamic understanding, but we will not go towards that kind of things. When we talk about religious conversion, the first impression comes to our mind is movement, moving away from one religion towards another, turning our face away from one direction to another. The second impression come to our mind is a process. A process, conversion is a process. And the third is transformation and character building, especially in relation to our religious identity. We have inherited those expressions from our traditional understanding of religious change or religious conversion, which normally they've been produced by the Christian scholars in the West within the Christian context of the West or the European. Whether those impressions works for our 21st century, that is a question, because those impressions, for example, works, let's say in Iran, but may not work for the converts in Europe. We will again look at some of those later. And the second, interestingly, religious conversion is not a new topic. It is as old as of course, the Bible. The first place we hear about religious conversion is in the New Testament, and the dramatic religious conversion of Paul. All of us will remember that. And however, the religious sociologists, especially the second part of the 20th century, witnessed to a significant growth number of studies in the area of religious conversion, despite the fact that there is no any unified understanding of definition of religious conversion. Among those scholars, we can name Loveland and Stark, talking about conversion model based on tension and problem solving, Grell focusing on spoiled identity, Strauss focusing on social network system as a place to restore identity and meaning, Gartel and Shannon exploring religious movement and suggesting a market model, and Rambo, my favorite one, developing the 7-stage model, and Gurin offering career conversion. Of course, and Stark and Fink, we shouldn't forget them, because they gave us the rational choice theory, which is very much used by the converts. It seems to me that when we turn into the 21st century, the religious conversion as a field of study kind of fade away from the scholars, especially within the Europe and the North America. Despite the fact in the beginning of 21st century was much more interesting time for understanding religious conversion. For example, we heard a lot about conversion of a significant number of North Africans, Nigerian, Algerians, Tunisian, Moroccans into Christianity at the beginning of 20th century. And then we start hearing a lot about conversion of significant number of Iranians, not only in Iran, but also in diaspora, into Christianity. One of the possible silence that might link to some policies or diplomacy of interfaith dialogue between Muslim and Christians, or perhaps the constitutional agendas of some of the religious institutions kept those silence, or perhaps because most of the religious conversion, especially from, let's say, from Islam to Christianity, normally seen as a baggage of colonial mission-orientated agendas. Perhaps that is another reason religious conversion, study of religious conversion becomes silent. They recently start growing again, especially after the 2010-2011, more and more Iranians converted and Afghans converted to Christianity in Europe. And interestingly, some of the books written again about converts, normally they're written from a positive attitude, mainly to encourage church and to talk about the movement of the Holy Spirit and so on, not in the sense of analyzing them from the sociological point of view. However, as a non-European and as a convert myself, and my study and based on my research in Middle East and Europe, I have noticed religious conversion is very much agenda-driven. And it is agenda-driven not by the missionaries or evangelists or the church or Christian institutions, but by the converts and seekers themselves. The seekers' agenda and motives have significantly influenced also by the socio-political situations and their life circumstances, as well as, of course, globalization. That means the demand for religious conversion was not created by the church or mission agency or the church, but by the seekers, for example, in Iran, and also in Europe, again, by the migrants and refugees. And I did a research in Denmark, literally migrants, refugees would come and knock at the door and says, we want to become a Christian, what can we do? And the church didn't know how to respond to that kind of demand. What does conversion mean? As I say, there is no unified definition for that. Borrowing from Rambo, there is a universe of possible meaning in the concept of conversion. For that reason, Rambo defines conversion in this way. Conversion can mean whatever one chooses it to mean. If we reflect on this definition, though it looks rational and logical and fits perfectly to our 21st century situation, there is a sense of dissatisfaction in it, at least for me as a convert. Being myself a convert and listening and study many conversion stories of Muslim background people in the Middle East and in Europe, the ambiguity of meaning of the concept, the historical and biblical background to the issue, the Islamic culture that converts have been brought up in, and the social and political situation of refugees, their deconversion stories from Islam, as well as their agendas and motives, have been the notion of religious conversion, made the notion of religious conversion very challenging to define. And the Rambo's definition leaves us a bit empty. At least it leaves me a little bit empty. That means conversion is a controversial concept, especially when it enters into languages such as Farsi and Arabic, or cultures such as Islamic culture, in which change of religion is prohibited and religion is seen as ascribed, communal, and hereditary, a great contrast to increasingly individualized relationship to religion in the Western Europe or in North America, perhaps in North America less, in Europe more. Therefore, what does it mean for a Muslim background migrant refugee to convert to Christianity in Europe or to convert to Christianity in Iran? In my PhD study, I have discussed this issue mainly focusing on those who converted to Christianity in Iran, mainly based on a self-description. But in this talk, I'm going to mainly focus on those people, Iranians mainly, converted to Christianity in Europe, because we don't have time to talk about the conversion of Iranians in Iran. Many of us Christians like to believe that it is Christian message of salvation that brings Muslim to Christ. For some of us might be a disappointment when we realize that actually, let me just change my, realize actually that is not the case. And that is not true. Faith conversion comes at last stage of conversion. Majority of religious conversion, especially from Islam to Christianity, and perhaps from Christianity to Islam, because there are a good number, increased number of Christians also converting to Islam, are less about religion and more about converts' agenda, motives, and especially socio-political situations of our world today. As I mentioned earlier, religious conversion is very much agenda-driven, but not the agenda of Christian agencies, or it is the strategy of the individual seekers who make the decision and create demands for that. But what is the purpose? Part of the socio-religious and political situation of the Middle East has been the rise, and of course in Europe as well, the rise of religious extremism and populism. Some of us may think that the rise of religious extremism, such as ISIS and even Iranian regime, should push people away from religion rather than encouraging them to convert to another one. That is true to some extent, and it is happening. If you look at the new surveys done within the Muslim countries in the Middle East, you notice a huge rise of people seeing themselves as agnostic or call themselves as atheists. However, it is not easy for a Middle Eastern or Iranian to abandon one's religion, in which for several thousands of years, religion has been the provider of and making and helping us to make sense of the world and of self, and shaping and reshaping our identities and forming our value system. That is why even atheism in our part of the world is not really about the absence of God. And I'm sure Andrew meant that when part of my introducing me and calling me also, I'm coming from the background of atheism. It is more about being angry with God. Why have you forsaken me? I've been following the Iranian Facebook page, atheist Facebook page. Most of the posts there and argues there, it is anger towards God rather than denial of God. Even their denial of God comes out of their anger. Therefore, when our meaning-making system as a religious person has been spoiled, we need to replace it with something similar, another religious system, a system that is also close to our previous one, even if our aim is not to stay forever in that religion. It would help us through a transition to find a permanent solution. The converts' agenda states the purpose of their conversion, as I mentioned earlier. However, whatever the motives and purpose might be, hope sits at the center of every conversion decision and every conversion stories. The purpose could be dominated by either spiritual or secular motives. Spiritual motives could be simple as seeking healing or answer to prayer. And secular motives could be migration, integration, seeking membership, affiliation, and belonging, and so on. However, it is not always either or situation. In every conversion story, even those dominated by secular motives, there are rich elements of spirituality. Hope, as I said earlier, hope sits at the center of religious conversion, as does in migration. And therefore, there are lots of similarities between conversion and migration. And even there are similarities in the process of migration and the process of conversion. Both hope for better and safer life in this world and possibly next world. Whatever the purpose might be, spiritual secular conversion is used as a tool and a resource. And then let's just move to section 2, understanding religious conversion as a social capital resource. What does it mean by social, what do I mean by social capital resource in relation to religious conversion? Social capital theory has the potential to improve our understanding of the role of religious conversion and religiosity of Muslim refugees and migrants in Europe in regards to their integration process. Bourdieu and Coleman were among the first scholars that introduced the term social capital. Bourdieu's concept of social capital is very much connected to different societal fields in which agents or actors are at work and social praxis take place. That means social capital cannot stand alone. However, for our purpose, I think Coleman's definition of social capital more suitable because it embeds the concept in the context of the rational choice theory, in which social interdependency linked to events and resources are controlled by other actors. Within this theory, using social capital resource generates social relationships, and relationships also represent resources of individuals and institutions. The thing, social capital theory helps us to understand the conversion, religious conversion, because it will also consider the migrants and refugees' background and methods as a capital resource for the church in the host society as well. Coleman explains his definition in this way. Social capital is defined by its function. It is not a single entity, but a variety of different entities having two characteristics in common. They all consist of some aspects of social structure, and they facilitate certain actions of individuals who are within the structure. We see in Coleman's definition that social capital is generally used to denote any aspects of social relationships that enables members to work together to achieve collective goal, to achieve something. Bourdieu and Coleman did not include religion as a capital, a type of capital, but included within social and cultural types. However, in reality, religion and religious communities, including religious communities, migrants, and even their conversion, religious conversion, even in our 21st century, are the most important source of social capital in the society, in our society. Religious as social capital has potential to generate more social capital than other institutions. And later on, I will talk about how converts are using conversion to process their integration or membership within the church. How does it relate to religion and practice of religious change among migrants? The issue of migration and religious is not a new issue, as all of us we know. Its history is as long as the history of migration itself. And of course, the Bible again tells us a lot about that, we have Abraham and the first one, I think, it's Adam and Eve anyway. However, majority of studies on religion and migration focused on migrants' home religion. There has not been enough research on how the religion of the host country or society has been used as a tool in the process of migration and integration. The data for my argument, of course, are coming from my interviews with converts in Denmark, in UK, Turkey, Cyprus, as well as my personal observation and interactions with migrants and refugee converts in Germany, Sweden, Finland, Netherlands, and wherever I go. And let's just look back again to what happened in 2011, not the Arab uprising. Of course, the Arab uprising created a huge number of refugees, and some of them crossed to Europe and made Europe into a shock, because they never really had such things, although that was not a huge number in relation to refugees, even in the Middle East itself. It wasn't a huge, but still it was a shock. However, this wave of refugee and migrants from Muslim background into Europe brought challenges and opportunities for European policymakers, societies, as well as church institutions. One area that became noticeable was an increased number of requests for baptism into Christianity among refugees and migrants, especially among Iranians, Afghans, and Kurds, of course, to a lesser extent among Arabs. With some churches, for example, in Denmark, never had an experience of baptizing or teaching a Muslim background adult into Christian faith. We also notice an increased number of reports, not only from churches that baptizing Muslims, but also from media and politicians. Although there are no accurate statistics on the number of converts, the increase in requests for baptism and asylum cases based on conversion has come to the attention of even mainstream media, such as New York Times, BBC, Telegraph, and so on. It has also challenged some governments, such as Norway, Denmark, UK, and other governments, to understand the asylum cases of Muslim converts to Christianity, and to also see the political consequences of conversion of refugees in their own home countries, such as Iran. Many of these countries have even spent money doing research to understand the potential consequences. And I'm sure many of you have read annual report of Home Office in this regard. And the same, Denmark, Norway also produce annual report regarding conversion of Iranians into Christianity, and what is Iran's regime's position in such things. Based on my observation and experience, especially within the Western Europe, I have noticed that that the controversial interpretations of the act of religious conversion in Europe has not been very helpful. For example, the church calls refugees' religious conversion a search for truth and salvation, while the media and politicians call it exploiting, I quote from Telegraph, a loophole in the immigration system. However, in reality, there is much more behind a Muslim background refugee's request baptism than a simplistic approach of the church and the naive assumption of the media and politicians. One of these issues that deserves our attention is the use of religious conversion as a social capital resource, and its link to integration process, and it's significant in negotiating a space and belonging within their European host society, and an umbrella for protection. As an Iranian and a convert to Christianity, I have often been invited to speak or give advice by religious organizations, policymakers, and individuals in Europe, or talk to or teach converts in different parts of the world. What I have noticed in my study of religious conversion among Iranians, that there are huge differences between conversion between those Iranians who convert to Christianity in Iran and those who convert to Christianity in Europe. One of the differences is the process. The process in Europe is very, I would say, shallow and fast, and the process of conversion among the converts in Iran is the longer and even more painful. Not painful because of the persecution, painful because of the religious and faith connotation in their process. And that's based on that, I noticed that their definition of conversion and their process of conversion and decision-making process were also different. For example, in Iran, even if the concept of conversion is used as a resource, as a tool, and as a choice, its interpretation has been mostly influenced by religion as faith, rather than religion as resource. And religion and religio-political situation of the country, that's very much the foundation of any interpretation, any definition is religion in whatever way, negative or positive. With a strong sense of we versus I, and their practice of rational choice based on cost and benefit calculation weighs equally on two questions: what do I gain and what do I lose? And of course, again, in some of the stories when you read, the rational choice or the rational argument or case might look to many irrational, but still for them, that is the rational way they go through their calculation. The triangle interactions and negotiations were normally across Christian faith and Islam on one side, converts agenda and versus Christian media or Christian organization agenda another side, and the third part is converts and Christianity's culture and political context. Therefore, it's a triangle, constant dialogue, constant negotiation happening. However, in Europe, I become the center, and the cost and benefit calculation become very much based on what do I gain. It is more about gaining. There is not much about losing. Because there is, among the converts in Iran, there is always space to lose. There is always says, okay, I am going to lose that much. I don't even, and many of converts says, okay, even I don't mind to face persecution, but I'm going to convert. And therefore, there is always room to lose. But when it comes to in Europe, and this window become much narrower in the sense of losing. It is very important, actually, the issue of what I gain and what I lose. And that helps who we will become later from our faith journey. And interestingly, most of the negotiation, again, within between the converts in Europe and their faith, their new religion, are between the converts' agenda versus churches' institutions. In Iran, between converts' agenda and Christian message, but here is between the converts' agenda and churches' institutions. And migrants' social, political culture and the host cultural and political context. Negotiation between Christianity and Islam is very much limited to, for example, Iranian regime and ISIS. Iranian regime or ISIS become the symbol or Islam in that sense. But the negotiation between Christianity and Islam, even inner negotiation between Christianity and Islam inside a convert is much wider than that simplistic approach. Even if in the West we scream that Europe is no longer a Christian region, still for majority of migrants, Europe is a Christian region. European countries are Christian countries. And that is why Christianity, as they see Christianity as a religion of their host. So in their process of change, there is a strong emphasis on religion as a capital resource among Iranian refugees and migrants. And even they comment on it, look at the West, because they are Christians, they are much ahead in everything, and it is Islam push us back. And again, there are lots of that kind of discussions. When I am with my fellow Iranians, we discuss in that sense. For them, religion and religious institutions are the best gateway to the host society that can grant them membership, provide them space in which they can argue their case, negotiate their belonging and the space with the rest of the society, not only in the church, negotiate their space with the rest of the society. We are one of you. Because we become a Christian, we are a Christian. The church can also advocate for their asylum cases. At the same time, religious institutions can provide tools for them so they can reconstruct and reshape or revisit their religious identity and their meaning-making system. And of course, the church is always there for whoever needs help. And I hope it is. So religious association, church association provide physical care, social, emotional, legal, mainly in form of advocacy supports. For example, majority of asylum cases of converts have very significant church involvement in them. One of the recent examples in Glasgow is the new successful case that was published in Herald's Scotland News, titled "Iranian Muslim Who Convert to Christianity in Glasgow Win Right to Remain in Landmark Asylum Cases," which was written by Martin Williams. However, beside the issue of integration and migration process is also the rise of racism and populism linked to the increase of refugees and migrants in Europe, population in Europe, as well as the growth of Islamic extremism. For example, beheading of this poor teacher by an extreme Muslim in Paris, of course, would have also backlash against even normal, ordinary Muslims who do not want to be part of that kind of things. Still, they are also not being protected against the rise of Islamophobia and attacks or these things. And therefore, for some refugees, conversion provide that kind of protection, not only for themselves, but also for their family. For example, two interviews I had. One was a lady, I asked her, why do you want to convert to Christianity? She says, because I don't want my children to be associated with Muslims. I wanted them to known as Christians. It is, I want to protect them against Islamophobia. She was very clear in her agenda. And another thing which I observe, especially among men in Denmark, is when they walk in the street, they normally wear a big cross. They try to put their cross outside of their t-shirt tops or whatever. And the moment they come to the church or to their home, they put it inside. They put it outside when they walk in the street, just to present something, says, yes, I look like them, but I'm not them. And that is, we need also to pay attention to that kind of behavior as well. As refugees use religions of the host as resource for their integration and to fit into this Christian society, communities, and the Western society. So religiosity of refugees and their methods of integration should also be considered as a component of social capital, especially in relation to the fact that integration is a two-way process. If the church wants to help refugees to integrate, integration is a two-way process. They cannot, without the church itself, also go through integration. Building later, and I will talk about it in the section of the church. Building of the trust between migrants and locals. That is another interesting thing which church can use that methods in that way. It provides the church a new opportunity of being a church for the 21st century. In the word of that, migration and people's movement are on rise. The church has significant role to be bridge, allowing migrants to speak for themselves and to build bridges between fearful locals and hopeful migrants. Where am I? And therefore, as I mentioned through my talk, the three main areas that migrants use religious conversion are external, a gateway to the host society, membership, negotiating belonging and space, internal, reconstructing and reshaping of religious identity, and finding a new meaning-making system, and also protecting themselves from Islamophobia and racism. In the section 3, I'm going to, how much time do I have? Yes, I'll be quick. In the section 3, I'm going to talk about the possible implications for the church. Church should have a holistic approach towards the concept and the practice of conversion, embedding converts methods in all three areas. External, making the, as I mentioned earlier, making the integration a two-way process. At the moment, even those churches who have converts among themselves in their congregation mainly focus on converts. They don't focus on the integration of the whole church. The whole church needs to go through the integration process. Move the church from a welcoming church to an inclusive church. And we sometimes feel proud of our churches to be welcoming, but sadly, most of our churches are stuck in the loop of welcoming. There is no way to know when the welcoming finished and the converts or migrants will be included into the bigger body of the church. Becoming a bridge. And most of the times, church is very good at talking for migrants, and they are not very good at allowing or preparing converts and migrants to present themselves, to talk for themselves. And to build bridges between fearful locals and hopeful migrants. I went to an island in Sweden 2 years ago when the church noticed I was there, asking me to give a talk in their Sunday service. And then I gave a short talk. After my talk, 2 ladies came literally crying and shaking and telling me, all these Muslims are coming to take over the Europe. We need your help. And that fear is very much part of our church, sadly. And to tell you the truth, sometimes I see that in our churches, there are more unconscious bias and racism than outside, because we don't deal with those fears which some of our congregations might have. And that is also a very good time to build bridges and between these fearful locals and hopeful migrants. This is, and from the eternal part of that, and it is very much related to faith school strategy. And in my view, any church with a good number of converts, they have to have a strategy for that, because most Bible studies is really not enough to help a convert from a Muslim background to reshape, to construct their religious identity. And it is not enough to build a new meaning-making system. And this faith strategy should also include the transformation of the church itself, because the transformation of converts should be linked to the transformation of the church. And the integration of the church from a welcoming church to more inclusive church should also be part of this agenda of that. And then lastly, fear of unknown, as I mentioned, which we have been dealing with since, especially it increased since 2011 onwards. We do need to address unconscious biases in our churches. I can tell you lots of issues, and I've seen more racism within the churches than outside of the church. It's because we don't know how it is, because we don't believe. If we say that, our Christian and brothers, they would be offended. Brothers and sisters, they will be offended, we call them. The Islamophobia and the rise of populism are capturing those fears and feeding on them. Make an effort, we need to make an effort, the church needs to make an effort to make the society safer for all people, deliberately addressing the fear of a stranger, unconscious biases, through training and workshops. And the church is an amazing institution, as I say, a capital resource for the society. It doesn't matter, non-Christians or non-religion and religion as alike. Move from a charity giving and welcoming church to more inclusive church, unity and diversity. The charity giving and welcoming church is mainly from a power dynamic. That is why it won't allow the church's local congregation to see themselves that they too need a transformation in that relationship, in that things. And therefore we need to move on from charity giving. Of course, charity is part of who we are as a Christian. Our mission is holistic and integral mission. And of course we have to welcome, but it is not the main. It is mainly should be a resource, as a tool rather than the means. I think I'm going to stop here because I think I used most of my time. And thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for this. Gosh, there's so much there that to discuss and think upon. I've got lots of questions, but I would like to open up the floor to questions or discussion. So you could either let us know by chat or by raising your hand, and we'll try and catch you if possible. And don't forget that you're muted and you have to unmute yourself. But thank you very much indeed for that wonderful talk. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe I could start the questioning then. I'm just picking up on your very last point there. It made me feel very conscious that coming from a university context where one is obliged, quite rightly, to have training sessions in things like unconscious bias all the time in the university, and those have to be updated. In the church, we don't do anything like that. We don't require that. I mean, do you think that that's something that really churches ought to think very carefully about and be doing more serious training of, first of all, clergy and ministers in the first instance, but then also congregations should be participating in the kind of training that in many other professional or social areas in life, and I'm just thinking for myself of a university, one is actually required to take part in these.
Yes, and I think, of course, that is one of the research I've done, the work I've done for the Lutheran Church in Denmark, for the whole church, the state church, and to understand refugees and migrants, and not only to help or support the church, but also what is the implication for the future of the church. Those church needs to redefine itself in that sense, because you're not going to get rid of migrants. And you're not going to get rid of conversion. Conversion has become an interesting, perhaps, fashion or whatever we wanted to call it. And how church can turn that into more faith-based conversion and support that, rather than leave it to as experimenting for them whenever they come and whenever they go. For example, that is why one of my recommendations for the Lutheran Church was to train their pastors, and now they have a kind of training school that train pastors who are working among migrants and refugees, how to develop that. Of course, when the church wanted to do that, there was a huge division between the churches who were anti-conversion and the church and the pastors who were anti-conversion and the pastors who were for conversion. And then also again, pastors who were even for conversion but wanted to Christianity be a cultural Christianity, and then pastors who wanted Christianity to be a faith-based Christianity. And there was a huge, interestingly, it was very interesting and eye-opening to listen to those pastors. And I interviewed 21 Lutheran pastors talking about that kind of things. It was very fascinating. And I hope and I wish churches in the UK also would have done that kind of things.
Thank you. Andrew, you have a point to make.
Yeah, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. Thanks, Sara, for your talk. It related to so much of my kind of experience here in Glasgow over the past decade or so. So one of the things I've often struggled with is this very negative portrayal of kind of Muslim background seekers. I use the term belong before they believe. You mentioned that people might come to a church, they have that social capital. They belong to that, perhaps before they believe. And it's very complicated when the asylum system is there kind of hanging over everything. And I think there's often a negative portrayal of seekers. There's a suspicion that they might be kind of not serious or kind of exploiting a loophole, as you mentioned. But it places quite a heavy responsibility on ministers who are often asked to almost make a judgment on the reality of someone's conversion. And that kind of model of belonging before you believe is something which is open to native indigenous people without any questions being asked. But because of the asylum system and the immigration system, there's lots of suspicions that come with that for Muslim background people. And it's there isn't a question at the end of this, but it's more of a reflection and something that you've helped me to kind of think about again. So I don't know, any comments on that?
I think the church should deliberately, I mean, we should not judge, because that is the fact. First, we have to accept the fact. As I said, almost, perhaps I can dare to say, majority of 90% of the conversions of Muslims to Christianity in Europe, they don't have religious motives or conversion as faith motive. They do have other motives. It doesn't matter. Church needs to know how to turn those motives through their own strategy, how to do that. And the problem is sometimes converts have their own agenda, church has their own agenda. They don't meet anywhere. There has to be some of the dialogue and conversation and negotiation in between. And then to allow those to go through these things. And I think if we don't, of course, the cultural differences also it's a huge issue. But we have to be aware of those motives and agenda to help us to plan better, especially plan our strategy of the integration, mainly faith integration. They are very keen to the cultural integration. Why not to do both together, but in a more, for example, one of the things, a recommendation I gave to the Lutheran Church in Denmark is to establish a faith school, called faith school. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but in a deliberate, not only based on Bible studies or discipleship programs, it won't work. You have to put your finger in the button of some of this religious agenda inside your own converts, which will be related to the context. For example, you can't separate Christian converts from Iran from the history of Christianity in Iran. You have to bring it in to allow them to say, wow, I am stepping in the footstep of the saints who've been before me, or these things, and I have responsibility to help them to understand and be accountable to a bigger picture of the church, rather than only extreme individualism. For example, if you talk to a convert in Iran, when they talk about their issue, most of the time says we. But when you talk about converts here, to talk to converts here, most of the times they talk about I. And then how can that I be expanded into a we, which include the extended their context into Iran and whatever.
Thank you. Pastor Fahim.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, first of all, for such a event and who've been hosting and putting all this program together. Can you hear me clearly?
A little bit louder if you can.
Okay, I just want to thank you for such a time and program that people put together. And also I really have a big thanks to my dear sister, Dr. Afshar, that's mentioning all those. It's a beautiful and way she been mentioned it. But I'd like to add just in very little different perspective. I just have a comments, if you don't mind, just for a very short. One of the things that I also experiencing that there is quite a distance between people who come to the Lord and convert in the Iranian churches, Persian churches, or the people who come to the Lord to the English churches in Europe or in North America. It's quite a distance, which is we hopefully that we can connect them together. And this is one of the issues we have. I experienced that. I believe she mentioned that, but in different perspective. The other things I also realized that today we have a huge challenge regarding or sharing the gospel as a missionary, as a worker who serve. We see that the old school way that it's been really not going so much far, which is we have to have a balance between the spiritual and physical life, which is many converts they come in from Islam to Christianity, they confused, and that's kind of been big challenge. And the second things, I just go very short. I just touched it, and I'm not going to go detail because of the sake of time. But the other things that are very important that it's been a very big challenge, that the follow-up of the process of conversion. We have not. Can you hear me? Still are with me?
Yes. Yes, okay. We can hear you.
We have. Yeah, one of the biggest challenge we see in the conversion that we will realize that quite again problems and challenges we have in converts community, that's Muslims convert to Christianity, that there is no follow-up. There's a lot of converts, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of follow-up, which is it's create a challenge right now and confusion. And this is something that I was just going to short mention it. And I thank you again for this opportunity for me. I can share that.
Thank you so much, Keshish Fahim, for your comment. And I would really encourage other my fellow Iranians and converts to also comment. Thank you.
We have two questions, Jim first and then Frith Rob.
Thank you, Sarah, for a very wide-ranging talk, and I'm very impressed with your command of languages if you've been speaking to people in Denmark and Norway and Sweden. I'm sorry that my question has got tailed off at the end. To what extent have you found that converts from Islam to Christianity are able to grow in their Christian faith within the church? What helps them and what hinders them?
I think we have some amazing converts who have been grown into their faith beautifully. And not only, for example, even if you look at the Church of England has nearly, I think, around between 8 to 10 pastors been ordained into the ministry of the Church of England in here. And then many are now training. And then you can also see lots of other really pastors or people they love to preach. One of the things which I notice is among the converts, and especially even in Iran and in Europe as well, when converts get to know their faith, their true Christian faith, they become so excited and they become evangelists. And all of them, they love to evangelize. I think, but however, one of the things which again I noticed, majority of converts, their understanding of Christian faith is very much tailor-made based on their story of the conversion from Islam, their memories of Islam, and also their conversion process and agenda. For example, if they have a bad memory of Islam, they don't like anything resemblant to Islam. They wanted to cut it off and they don't want to talk about it. But if they have a good memory from Islam, therefore they do actually add into their conversion understanding and to their new understanding of Christianity. It's a very fascinating if you study their faith.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Frith, Rob.
Hello, thank you for bringing
Hello.
me in. I'm called Frith here in the UK, but my real name is Farifte, and I am Iranian, and I was in a slightly more unusual situation in that my conversion happened in Iran in 1978, and that's where I was baptized at St. Paul's Church in Tehran a few months before the revolution. So I have been a Christian now, an Iranian Christian, for 40 years. And living in the UK since in the 80s. I came out after the revolution, and I am married to a Scottish doctor and have lived here in Edinburgh for the last maybe 30 years. I don't sound Iranian. People say I don't look Iranian, although I am from the north of Iran, which has a common border with Russia. So perhaps I'm not so olive-skinned. However, people take me to be either English or American or Canadian. And they are very, very surprised in church to realize I'm from Iran, and also surprised that I am very loyal to Islam and very loyal to my Iranian culture. Of course, my parents were devout Muslims, but very broad-minded. And not all Muslims are Kalashnikov-wielding mullahs. And I think people here in the church, especially Christians, say, oh, how can you support them? And how come you're so affiliated and in love with that kind of culture? But it is my culture. It is part of my identity. And I think the converse of what Sara was trying to say is also applicable to converts who are so fully integrated that their integration isn't accepted by the local congregations where they worship. And that was just a comment I wanted to make, just to throw it into the mix.
Thank you, Farif. It's good to see you.
You're welcome.
Do you have any comments, Sara, on that, or reflection from that?
No, she's totally right, because that was also my answer to Jim. If you have a good memory of your old religion, you don't just throw everything out. You embed some of it into your faith.
Exactly.
Could I, as a follow-up to that, Sara, ask what advice would you give to people who are training ministers and ordinands in how our worship in Christian churches then can be more, can perhaps be better adapted or in some way cognizant of the kind of experiences that you're describing?
One of the things which I noticed within the churches when I go there is most of the times their focus is on the converts, and much less focus on their teaching and much less focus on their own integration or their own understanding. And I think that is where they go wrong. That is why Andrew was talking about sometimes there is a sense of belonging, not believing, and sometimes there is a very much agenda-driven and focus on asylum cases without really moving on into their faith things. I think it is very much, we do need to, I do believe we do need to have a training for the pastors in different areas, not only from the contextualization point of view to know the converts, but also from understanding their methods, because some of the methods of migrants are really amazing. Some of the methods, if you study them, they are very good. You can, for example, one of them is the method of trying to integrate or using the church as a gateway in the, saying, okay, I'm not one of them. I'm one of you, one of us. But the church, that is also my own struggle with the church here. The church, it is hard to help the church to move from the concept of them and us to concept of us in a general sense. They are part of my family. Because again, one of our misunderstanding about loving our neighbors is we always keep the neighbor. We don't allow the neighbor to become friend and family. We always say, okay, especially nowadays, neighbor means nothing really. I don't know my neighbor, but they are my neighbor. Occasionally I pray for them, even if I don't know their names. But how can move them into us? How can we become more kingship approach in our training in our teaching?
Yeah, thank you. Andrew, you've got a comment. We're drawing close to the end of time, but could you come in here, Andrew Parfitt?
It was just a reflection on your question from my own kind of limited experiences. I've found that just making space for people to ask questions, and now if we're kind of very structured in our liturgy, that might not be in a Sunday service, but that's been absolutely crucial, because people come with a variety of different questions, things which I could never have imagined, but that's kind of what they're going through and what they're processing. And so I think perhaps one of the keys might be, to consciously make space for people to ask the questions they have about faith, practice, and doctrine. And again, in my own experience, making space for people to actually ask questions about the sermon. Well, that's a risky thing, but it's actually something which has been really appreciated by kind of people from Muslim background that I've worked with. They can actually say, I don't understand, or what does that mean, or can you unpack that a bit for me? Otherwise, they go away without anything, really.
Yeah.
Can I just thank you, Andrew, for the comment. I'm going just to make a comment. Or one workshop I did in the UK, it was very fascinating. What I did, I separate the Danish congregation from the refugee and migrant converts congregation, and I put them into different groups of maybe 5, because I wanted everyone to talk, 5 people. And then I says, okay, now talk about how do you perceive the locals, and write down. And then the second thing is, what do you like to tell them about all these things? And then to the local also says, okay, you also do the same. How do you perceive the migrants and refugees? What do you like to tell them about all these things? And then when they finish their practice, I sent a member with the list to each other's group and communicate those. And they were very surprised because those were very honest questions or discussions or comments or that kind of things. And it helped them to create a kind of dialogue. After that, they become more talking to each other. Yes, you are right. We are like that. Oh, yes, you are right. We need to be better in the sense of interacting and all these things.
Right. Thank you. We've time for one more question, if there is, or a comment, if there's anything further before we begin to draw to an end.
David Bart McGettrick here.
Bart, hello, lovely to see you. Yes.
Good to see you too. Very well, and you?
Good, yeah.
We were colleagues at the university. Just a reflection. I come from the tradition of the Catholic Church. Does the recent encyclical by Pope Francis on the broad concept of fraternity offer us some kind of beacon of hope in some of these matters?
I think so, because one of the things which Pope Francis gave the whole chapter to is the concept of neighbor and the Samaritan, and who is the Samaritan, and how can we make neighbors into friends, and then not. I think so. I think that I enjoyed reading it, and I think it is a very good, really, a reflection.
I think it gives a sort of wider vision of humanity that is trying to reduce these barriers when we talk, as we have to, about migrants and Muslims and Christians and so on and so on. And often we're creating walls rather than breaking down the walls. And I think it seems to me that in the modern world, our responsibility is to break down walls. That's our sole purpose in life, really. Break down the walls.
Yeah, exactly.
Sara, would you like to make any final comments in the light of that? Perhaps that's a good place to end, but I would invite you to make any final comments that you may have before we finish.
I think the church has an amazing place to break down those walls. And I have to say the church has not used its privilege in Europe to bring those walls down. And the church also has not been able to use the connection which migrants and refugee and converts bring into the church, use them in much wider context of becoming us. And that is why one of the topic I wrote a little bit, but I have only talked about it, a few places never published that, is how to move from charity giving and welcoming to kingship. And I think that is, we need to think how to move from charity giving, which comes from a power dynamic, and create walls rather than, yes, you may feed them, but still the walls are there. And that is my prayer for the church.
Amen.
Thank you very much indeed. And on behalf of everybody, if I may put it this way, here this evening, thank you for such a graceful and informative and stimulating lecture and all the conversation that followed it. You've given us all a great deal to think about, and we're deeply grateful for your coming to us this evening and talking to us. And I'm sure that your talk will bear very much fruit in our thinking and hopefully in the life of the church and Christians in this country. Thank you very much, Sara.
So thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope, Nicholas, you feel better soon.
Well, on that point, could I thank everybody for coming? But before you all go, just invite Nicholas, who is recovering from an operation at the moment, but sitting next to me here, just to say something about our next meeting on the 24th of November, Tuesday, the 24th of November, in a week's or two's time. Nicholas.
Thank you, David. Our next meeting, we will be welcoming Rabbi Ra'anan Malek, who will join us from Shorashim in Galilee. He is a rabbi in the Masorti tradition of Judaism, very prominent both in human rights work and in peace building in the Middle East, and also in interfaith relations. He has worked extensively with the World Council of Churches and other ecumenical Christian organizations, and he will be speaking to us about the role of that religion can play in peace building. And I hope you will all be able to join us then. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. And once again, thank you all for coming, and especially thanks to Sara. And at that point, I think we'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you.